Alrighty, so I have the wonderful Zach from Imperial Triumphant with me here today. How are you, my friend?
I'm wonderful. Thanks for having me.
Good. It's great to finally see you again. It's been what, like two years almost, I think, since the last time you guys were in the UK.
Yeah, just about 2 years. Feels much longer.
I bet, man. How are things with you in New York? I presume you're in New York?
I am in New York. Things are great. We've been really busy doing a lot of press for the new record and gearing up for these upcoming tours and shows we have. So feels good to be busy again.
First sort of question I wanted to ask was, so after Alphaville, where you've kind of conquered everything that you wanted to do in that sort of chapter of your life, what made you want to go on and think, right, okay, it's time for a next record?
Not, I don't know. Just like the artistic drive, I guess. We finished the album. There was no touring to be done, and we just started jamming and writing new material, and it all came about very organically. So thinking like, okay, we all feel like there's still stuff to explore, stuff to music to make. None of these ideas are rehashed from Alphaville or anything, so it's all still original.
Mm. I definitely agree, man. I think, especially in the sort of like overall vibe of Spirit of Ecstasy is so much darker, I found. Was that kind of like on purpose, or was that just kind of
Not really. I don't know. Everyone's been saying that the record, a lot of people are saying that the record's more chaotic, more extreme, more insane. But to us, it's like more like we're focusing even harder on like developing themes and a lot of people say that our structures are non-existent, but it's really just a lot of the songs are just this sort of sonata allegro form in a loose way. And so we've just really been focusing on our songwriting, and I think it really just comes down to perspective.
Mhm.
If you grew up listening to avant-garde classical and modern jazz and stuff like that, you listen to Spirit of Ecstasy, it's going to sound like a rock album. You know what I mean? So it's just about your experience in this kind of music.
So I can't remember the word you literally just used. Was it sonata something?
Sonata Allegro form.
Yeah. So is that kind of similar to? Is it
That's
through
like a
composed?
classical form of composition, as opposed to like more modern stuff like verse, chorus, bridge, verse, chorus, what you find in like Metallica music and stuff like that, like
Mhm.
or pop music or rock stuff like that. They use that form, which is very common. It's very good for hammering in catchy ideas or making an idea feel catchy because you've heard it so many times.
Oh,
And then a lot of metal bands will also use like through composed form where it's like A to Z, never repeats, and
yeah.
you know it's all whatever you want the song to be. There's no right or wrong structure.
Because I feel like you guys don't really have like a blueprint of how you write a song. It's just kind of like how it comes together for that song, basically, right?
Yeah, whatever the song requires is what we're gonna do, and there's no rules on what can or can't be done.
So was that the sonata sort of way of writing? Was that because are you guys classically trained or?
Yeah, I don't think, but even with that, I don't think we were thinking directly like, okay, let's use our classical composition, like education to write this, bastardized sonata allegro form. I think it just sort of developed more instinctively of like, because it's not note for note sort of that form, but it is sort of like theme development, recapitulation, like taking you on a journey away from familiar motifs and then eventually reintroducing them in a uh, reharmonized or tweaked way.
Oh, right. Okay. So there is some repetition then in the way that it's created, is it?
Yeah, I mean, even if it's not a like repeated in the guitar riff, it's like the idea is repeated. You know what I mean? Like it'll certain songs will go back to the original concept of what that riff stood for or what the rhythm was. You know, like sometimes it's not just a tonal motif, but maybe a rhythmic motif that we're playing with.
Okay. So what is it that kind of like fascinates you about that kind of style of composing? It's really interesting because I've not heard about this sort of thing before.
I mean, that's just not all of our songs, but some of them
No.
are like that. But I'd say it's just it's a little. I guess the Sonata Allegro form's a little different um, than your pop or rock verse chorus style, but it still has elements of theme development and methods of making a song familiar, which is something we really try to ingrain in our music. And it can be very difficult when making very dissonant, challenging music, is to make songs stand out so that it's not just noise from start to finish. You know, within the album, but each song has like something that you can remember, whether that's uh, a rhythm or a melody or a lyrical hook or whatever. Like we want to give people, the listener, some sort of ground to stand on while everything else is falling apart around them.
Do you, I kind of, yeah, I get what you mean. Like, does that sort of work in the sort of ebb and flow of things? Like the first thing that came to my head was the bit in Metrovertigo where you're just like, whoa, which is like one of the crazy heavy moments I think I've heard this year.
Thank you. I mean, that was just like, yeah, that one was like a take that we did that was not even that we were. I did that take and I was like, let me try it a couple more times, and then our producer was just like, nah, that first one is the one. It came out, yeah, it just came out kind of tortured and fucked up, and yeah, like a little almost nervous or something. Like I like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But you can hear the sort of human behind it, but equally, like, I think it's because you guys play with
Fear within the music, you know?
fear, did you say?
Yeah, I think we put a lot of fear into the vocals delivery, like not just typical metal machismo sort of style of vocals, but like an element of like fear and being like the it sounds like the vocals are terrified. I think that's kind of cool.
Ah, so the vocals are terrified, not they're terrifying.
No, well, it's terrifying because they're scared, you know?
All right.
Come up across some homeless guy and he just comes up into your face and he's crying his eyes out, like sobbing intensely. You're you might get freaked out because that's kind of intense and a weird dynamic
Mm.
like that, you know, like that could be kind of abrasive in a way, as opposed to just typical, you know, fortissimo all the way.
Yeah, man, it's fascinating. So we kind of touched on this very, very briefly, but I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the actual thematics of Spirit of Ecstasy.
Well, I don't know if you knew this or I mentioned this to you, but Spirit of Ecstasy is actually comes from the name of the hood ornament on the Rolls Royce
Ah, right. Okay.
statue that goes on the front. Um, and I guess we kind of got inspired by high end luxury companies like Rolls Royce and Rolex and these brands that are, you know, known for like having luxury products that are also very, very well made, not just expensive for the sake of being expensive, but like, you know, when you study the components of what goes into making one Rolls Royce automobile, you realize how much detail is paid and how much detail is scrutinized over for the sole purpose of making the most luxury experience. You know, they're not making the fastest car, they're not making the safest car, they're not making the most gas efficient car. They're focused on making the most comfortable ride. And I think that's like so interesting. So we were kind of thinking, okay, what would happen if a band tried to make the most decadent metal record? And you know, it is something that we feel like we've come close to, is this completely over the top maximalist. Every detail is serves a purpose, and that purpose is for the function of the, like, to serve the avant-garde and pushing the boundaries of extreme metal. So like when people think that this music is our most extreme record or whatever, this is our most insane, it's like, it better be, because this is fucking I don't want to hear any whining.
That's okay. So is that sort of a little bit of an allegory as well? Because I feel like, I mean, and this could be pertaining just towards Alphaville, but there was very much a kind of duality of, you know, kind of the rich and the poor and the elite and things like that. Is that kind of continued a little bit in Spirit of Ecstasy?
Well, that was your idea.
Yeah.
I like that, because something that Imperial Triumphant really wants is people to infer their own concepts and develop ideas for themselves. And so that's what you took out of it, and I like that. It's cool that you've come up with this whole world, and there are elements of different perspectives within our music that delve into the lives of the low and the lives of the high, and there is elements of that, but at the same time it's also so much more. And I enjoy hearing what people think about our music conceptually, lyrically, and musically, because I think that's what makes this band fun for people, is that we're not just laying it out for you perfectly with every little, like, here's everything you need to know. It's a bit more veiled and a bit more mysterious, and it lets the listener use their own creativity or their own curiosity to come to their own conclusions.
Yeah. It's quite demanding, I guess, of the listener, which I kind of like, because it's like an active listen. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's plenty of bands that you can throw on for like a chill road trip or whatever, you know? So why not be something different?
Mhm. I think that's really cool. What have kind of, so obviously, like, you know, I'm sure you've done interviews with other people and stuff. Have kind of people's have they kind of had completely different,
Oh, absolutely.
like totally all over the place kind of thing?
Because they cut it with whatever they're thinking, you know, whatever their thoughts are and beliefs are. So it always gets changed up a little bit. I think that's cool.
I think that's great. And, you know, especially in the day and age of, you know, streaming and all this sort of stuff, I think it's really kind of, it speaks to the integrity of the three of you that, you know, you can do this and demand that of the listener. It's really cool, man.
Well, what's really cool is that people like it. I think that's unbelievable, and I never thought we would come this far. So off of more extreme music compared to like our earlier discography. So it does say something about the intelligence of our listeners and our fans, and it says something about the state of metal, that they're ready for something that's more demanding and more challenging, and they're the genre is ready to move forward.
I wanted to, obviously, this is probably some of my projections of what I interpret it all as, but, you know, I feel like obviously New York is a very important part of Imperial Triumphant, but what is it about the idea of a city that fascinates you guys so much?
Mm. It's tough to say. I guess the metropolitan life is all I've really known. This is where I was born and raised, so it's hard for me to give a perspective from outside of that. And we've always kind of, stood on the concept that you write about what you know. And since we're not from the Middle Ages, we're not from Scandinavia, we're not from a satanic background, like that's not a ground that we should be standing on. But we do know about New York City and the weight of the suffocating metropolitan life. And I think that is a concept that is pretty heavy and works well within the sonic landscape of death metal or black metal, whatever you want to call us. And so we're pretty happy with this little niche we've carved out.
So I wanted to ask, if you had to sort of personify New York as a person, what would that person look like to you?
I don't know, man. My first thought was Danny DeVito, but I don't know if that's the right answer. I feel like he's too good. I think a person, it's like, I don't know, maybe someone with 1,000 faces. That might be what they would look like, because it's such a multifaceted, diverse place that, like some crazy sort of like Hindu god with like 1,000 arms and 1,000,000 heads and shit. Like that's New York. It's too diverse. It's too big. There's too many cultures, too many languages for it to be like culminated into one person.
Moving slightly, I wanted to see, what is it that, or more, how has Kubrick influenced your style as a band? Because I feel like he's very intrinsic to the overall vibe of Imperial Triumphant.
I feel like you're right. I mean, Kubrick is the best. He's one of our favorite directors of all time, and it's almost like the same thing as Rolls-Royce. His attention to detail and layers to his work is something that plays a huge influence on what we do and the way we want to present our work. And so his influence you can find it not just visually, whether it's the music videos or whatever, but there's much more subdued influence as well within what we create. You can find Imperial Triumphant in Eyes Wide Shut. You can find it in Barry Lyndon. You can find it in A Clockwork Orange. You can find it throughout his music, 2001: Space Odyssey, like all that shit. You can see, Imperial Triumphant lifted that right out of the book.
So one other thing I wanted to ask was, obviously you've got like 1,000,001 different outside influences, and let's say in terms of the music, right? But how do you kind of, for lack of a better word, triumphize it?
Well, because it's all getting filtered through us, and there's only 3 of us, and we've played together now as a trio for maybe 7, 8 years. So we have a pretty strong chemistry between us, and the vibe is strong. And so we can just, writing or performing or recording it all, it's almost as if one person is doing it. Do you know what I mean? There's, especially when you get Trey and Colin involved, there's like this hive mind that everyone's working towards the same goal, and everyone's ideas make sense, and it just came from a different part of the same brain. You know what I mean?
Okay, so it's like a shared consciousness kind of thing between all of you guys.
I'd say between the five of us in the studio, you get like this fucking avant-garde, dissonant Voltron. One, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's the same beast, just one's on drums, one's, you know, behind the board, one's on bass, and everyone, but everyone working collectively towards the greater good of the music. No egos, no arrogance, none of that shit. It's just for the purpose of music.
So do you think that Colin and Trey kind of add a lot to, aside from obviously their fantastic abilities, you know? Yeah. Okay.
I mean, you can hear it. The leap from Vile Luxury to Alphaville is pretty nuts.
Very true.
And then you take Alphaville, the trip from Alphaville to Spirit of Ecstasy. That's the five of us getting to know each other. And then the five of us, we already know each other. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Okay.
Like the way I kind of the way I kind of phrased it was like that second year of summer camp when you're coming back and you see all your friends that you made the year before, and it's kind of like you don't have to make friends again. It's kind of like everyone's a vibe. I feel like that was kind of the atmosphere in the studio where we were all really just firing on all cylinders, and everyone was just working perfectly like a well-oiled V12 Rolls Royce, you know.
So I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about the artwork that adorns Spirit of Ecstasy.
The artwork, it comes from an idea we had. Steve and I last summer went to the Neue Gallery, which is just down the street. It's an Austrian art gallery that holds some pretty famous Gustav Klimt paintings.
Okay.
And we kind of got inspired by his work. You know, he's a pretty unbelievable Austrian painter from the Vienna Secession era. And his work is very imperial while not being Art Deco, but it's very gold inlaid, very very decadent, very it's just wonderful. And so we got this idea of doing sort of like a mixed medium where we hired a model to sort of look like a bit like Josephine Baker, who is this old sort of 20s like dancer, and then mix that with sort of a Gustav Klimt vibe, and then sort of just imperialize it and make it our own. And it's super weird and super different than what we usually do, which is like a big city. And I like that we did something different. And and whether people like the cover or not, you know, at least we did something different and didn't just give you another cityscape.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the end of the day, that's what I want to do most, is not repeat myself and not try to fall into even my own like themes or tropes, because I'm more interested in and just keep digging.
Yeah, but I totally agree, man. I thought it looked very very not metal, actually, in a refreshing way.
Oh, but I mean, how many albums can you buy with a melted skull and a goat on it? You know what I mean? Like, we're gonna just put. I kind of like the idea of it. It's almost a tranquil photo piece, which I think is so funny because everyone's calling it the most insane Imperial record. So I kind of love that it's our least extreme cover and our most extreme music.
But I really like the little, you know, the mask that's being held at the bottom, because there's that little nod.
It was so cool, that shoot as well, because I rented all this like period clothing from, like, a lot of the jewelry and stuff that she's wearing is from the 30s and 40s and stuff. And I
Oh,
just,
no way.
yeah, a lot of the pearls and that stuff. It was very cool to put that shoot together, and everyone was so talented. So it's just kind of worked out really well.
Oh, awesome. It also reminded me a little bit of that sort of fierceness of Grace Jones, you know, that kind of like really strong presence.
I mean, Grace, yeah. Well, we wanted a model that had a bit of androgyny to her,
Mhm.
and obviously Grace Jones is the queen of it all. Her style and everything is just so cool and over the top, and so maybe, yeah, I wasn't thinking Grace Jones, but it definitely does make sense.
Yeah. I kind of feel like Imperial Triumphant in some ways would be a real great gateway band for people who may not necessarily be well versed in death metal or, you know, things like that, but might be more open to classical or particular kind of art directions. You know, like you referenced a very famous painter there. I feel like maybe that might draw people in.
Yeah, why not? I think I mean, the people in the classical scene, they have a palette for this kind of stuff that is so much, I'd say, more developed than metalheads.
Oh, really?
Well, the people in the classical scene don't just listen to like Beethoven. They fuck with like super gnarly avant-garde, you know, Schoenberg, like modern, like opera shit. Like all the people that I was, you know, working with and friendly with in university that were more, you know, classical composers or classical players, they all, first of all, a lot of them do listen to metal because it is, you know, also an extreme form of music. And, you know, I've said this for many years, like a lot of modern classical is kind of taking the same path that jazz and metal is currently taking, you know, where it's getting, you know, it started out more primitive and is now getting absurdly extreme. And metal is sort of following that same path and the same trajectory that jazz took, you know, where it started out a bit more primitive, developed it a bit, and then got institutionalized, for better or for worse, probably worse, and then is now just, you know, could be anything. It could be as free or as chaotic as you want, you know.
Yeah. I hadn't really thought about that, but you're absolutely right.
Classical cats, those guys, like I said, I think a modern classical musician would listen to Imperial Triumphant and be like, "Oh, it's a cute rock band," or they might like it. I don't know. I shared the record with my college mentor, and he thought it was fantastic, which meant a lot to me.
But I think this is the thing, you know, that there is I mean, from what I kind of have been able to hear, there's quite a similar parallel between classical and metal, just because of the sheer amount of stuff going on at the same time. And I think you kind of need a bit of an attuned ear to kind of hear it all.
Yeah, well, you at least need good speakers.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, modern classical is, you know, there's always like more tonal stuff you can dive into. Like, you know, I've been listening to a lot of Moondog lately, which is not very dissonant at all.
Mm-hmm.
But then, you know, you can listen to Alfred Schnittke, who's of pretty recent, you know, last 50 years, whatever. And I really love his work so much.
Yeah.
And so and that stuff is really dissonant and really chaotic and a real just wild journey. There's so much stuff to explore, and it's really, it almost just a lot of it does just sound like an unplugged metal band. Like if you listen to like Shostakovich string quartets, those just sound like Gorguts unplugged, basically. It's pretty cool.
Acoustic Gorguts.
Yeah, exactly. If you wanted to know what like Obscura sounded like played by a string quartet, just listen to the Shostakovich string quartets and you'll be like, oh yeah, got it.
Amazing, man. Well, speaking of very gifted musicians, I wanted to you kind of find out a little bit more about the guest appearances. One thing I really liked was that there's so many people kind of playing different roles, but it is like a jazz collective kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I like to imagine it as if like you start the record and you walked into like some late night bar and there's a band just grooving, the house band's just grooving. That's us. And then there's all these like local cats come in that just sit in with a band for a couple songs, like real wanted to keep it really casual. And we usually do. Like usually the people that we work with, we don't give them that much instruction because they've been selected. They're either our friends or there's one degree of separation, but they've also been selected because we know that they understand what we're trying to do and they get the image, and they're just like us. They're pushing towards the greater good of the song, and so we don't need to like micromanage every note that they play.
It's interesting. I mean, obviously, aside from them being your friends and being in close proximity, how do you kind of choose each player, if for lack of a better word, really?
It's just whatever the song needs.
Mm.
If there's like a section, for example, Mercurius Gilded is a section where we have this really more. I mean, I wouldn't call it tonal, but it's kind of tonal. Like there's a base of like be augmented. Okay, we're just kind of chilling, like vamping on that chord for a while, and I'm just thinking like, okay, let's or B flat augment. I don't remember what it is. Anyway, I'm just thinking like I would love to have a dueling solo. It's just to have it more creative, more chaotic. And so, I'm having lunch with Max Gorlick, who's, he used to be an Imperial Triumphant. He's also my business partner. So we were having like a little bit of a business lunch.
Oh, cool.
And I brought it up to him. I was like, hey, would you and your dad be interested in doing like a dueling solos, sort of like call and response sort of thing in this section? And then, from there, it just exploded into like a very unbelievable segment of the song that I would never been able to write or play. So it was just like kind of like putting your faith into other people's talent and hoping, but also kind of unknowing that it's going to make the music better.
Yeah.
You just don't know how yet.
It is cool though. It's like a kind of I sort of referenced this in the review that I did, but like a Wes Anderson piece where you're like, oh, there's Bill Murray. Like he's not necessarily.
Yeah, I like that part of your review. That was cool.
It's because they kind of come in and you're like, oh wow, that's really cool, and then they just go off, but they're not the sort of like centerpiece of it. That's why it's so good.
Well, exactly, because we also have to play this music live, and I don't want it to be like, oh, we can't do it without this person. It should be more like a Wes Anderson film, like a cameo or something.
Moving into sort of visual aesthetics, I feel like, the visual side of Imperial Triumphant is really key to kind of really getting what you guys are about. But what made you kind of want to incorporate that as kind of like a major part of it?
I'm blanking on the guy's name, but Grahowski always quotes him. He says, they see you before they hear you.
Ah, cool.
Art Blakey, that's who said it.
Okay.
It's the idea that your music, whether you like it or not, is you're representing your music if you ever are performing it live. And that's an important thing. And how you represent yourself is a representation of your music. And so it got us thinking like, okay, what does our music look like? And so from that stems all this, costuming and stuff, because to us it felt necessary to put in that work and bring that visual aesthetic to light. But you'll notice that unless it's a music video or a photo shoot, we're never wearing it not on stage.
Yeah.
And that's because it is a visual representation of our music. It's not about hiding our identity or anything like that. It's just about when you're hearing Imperial Triumphant, this is what you're seeing.
That's cool. So finally, what would you say is the constant in Imperial Triumphant's ever evolving sound?
The constant, I would say, is the fact that it's always created from with just the three of us, in the sense that when we track, we don't have a click track. When we perform live, there's no click track. There's none of that shit. We don't even count in. We just look at each other and come in on the song. And
Really?
Yeah, I just think that's more charming to like create music from literally nothing, and there's no boundaries to how fast it's going to be that night, or how slow it's going to be that night, or how fast this take is going to be versus that take. And whatever happens within start to finish is completely up to us, and things can change. And I like that. I like that about their music, that things can change and things can evolve. And if you heard Swarming Opulence at the Dome in 2019, I guarantee you it's going to sound a lot different in 2022 at the Dome, which we're playing in a couple months. Make sure you get your tickets. Do you know what I mean? Like the songs themselves evolve over time. I think that's so much more fun.
So how do they evolve over time? Because you guys are so used to playing them?
Playing them over and over until we develop our own, they change. And I think that's the coolest thing about Imperial Triumphant, is that it's always changing, always evolving, and there's nothing holding us back.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Is there anything that you wanted to sort of add to our chat?
Yeah, I would just say that everyone go buy Imperial Triumphant's new record, Spirit of Ecstasy, out July 22nd via Century Media Records. It's on all streaming platforms, available in physical formats, however you like it. And we appreciate everyone who does buy the record, listens to the record. And please check out our website, imperial-triumphant.com, for all tickets and tour dates. We're coming to Europe and we're coming to North America throughout the next few months. A lot of shows coming up, so we appreciate everyone who shows up.
So thank you so much for being on the channel, Zach. I really, really appreciate it. I know you're a very, very busy guy, so thank you ever so much.
Sure. Thank you.